Hello, Philosophy Formula postgraduates. Very excited to have this conversation in the postgraduate course. We're going to be talking about the GAP, or General Adaptive Potential. Now, in some of the open office hours that we've had along the way in the core program during the first 12 weeks, we kept coming up with elements of this, and there were questions surrounding it. And I felt like we needed to devote an entire video speaking specifically about this because, to me, this is the culmination of all your chiropractic philosophy, all your chiropractic understanding. Everything that you've been organizing in your mind culminates, I believe, to this particular model. Now, as I always said, this is my philosophy and some of my premises. You may not agree with them all. That's okay. My goal here isn't to get you to agree with everything that I have to say or everything that I think or all my premises in chiropractic. My goal here is to get you to start figuring out what yours are. So if you do disagree with some of this, or if you want to take it in different directions, great. I encourage it. The goal here is to get you to start thinking about these things so you can draw conclusions about them. What philosophy is like, and what the experience should be, is that you have this vision of the world. In this case, maybe your vision of chiropractic or healthcare. And what starts to happen is, as you create new premises or clarify things, another light goes on over here, another light goes on over here, and the lights start going on all over the place, and the illumination of your field of view just keeps going wider and deeper. And the further you can see and the wider you can see, obviously the better off you are, and as a consequence, the better off your patients are. Where you have fuzziness or where you have dark areas or blind spots, that's what hurts you. So the reason that we stay engaged in the process is to continue to illuminate. And how we illuminate is through this up here. We use our minds and we think about our premises, and then we apply those premises to our lives, to our context, to our actions, most importantly, and then in the end, we grow. And not only do we enrich as far as our success and outcomes, we also enrich relative to our spiritual side, how we feel about life, how we feel about our purpose, how we feel about what we do in the world and who we're being. So I'm really happy to take this journey with you and to get into these videos and have this conversation on an ongoing basis. And as you're watching this, as always, this should be a regular routine for you. You should have pen and paper handy. And as questions are occurring for you or comments, jot them down so when we have our open office hours, you can bring them to the open office hours. You can post your questions or come inside the Hangout and talk and ask your question personally, and we can address it and handle it there. So let's talk about kind of where we are right now and how we lead up to this thing called the GAP. Our premises have been, and we've spoken around this for some period of time, the body is self-healing and self-regulating. The nervous system's the master system and controller of that body. If you interfere with nervous system function, you must necessarily interfere with the ability for the body to heal and regulate. Subluxations, by their very definition, interfere with nervous system function. So we want to address subluxations and we want to adjust them and we want to see the body function better. The question is, why do we subluxate? How does it happen? Why would two different people exposed to the similar type stresses have different subluxation patterns? There's all kinds of questions that come in here. Also, is a subluxation, and this is a big deal, is a subluxation a good thing or a bad thing? This is something that is kind of like a pivotal head scratcher that kind of gets people stuck as they go into this. Is a subluxation a good thing or a bad thing? Well, if you think it's a bad thing, why would the innate intelligence of the body make a bad thing happen? In other words, what is a subluxation? It's an adaptation to stress, right? Basically, it's an adaptive response. The body is overwhelmed by stress, and as a consequence, it subluxates or goes into defense physiology. So a subluxation is a sign that an individual is stressed beyond what we're going to call their general adaptive potential, which we'll talk about in a minute, not to the point of death, but enough that they cannot fully function. So, and this leads to changes in postural muscle tone, which affects the alignment of segments, which continues to adversely affect the nervous system. It sets up this negative cycle. So, but we understand that we subluxate because there is this adverse stress that's coming into life, and the body goes into defense mode or defense physiology, midbrain function, increased cortisol levels, increased adrenaline levels, blood out of the gut and into the trunk muscles, pupils dilated. You're on this heightened fight, flight, sympathetic state, and that is something that should not be sustained for an ongoing period of time, otherwise it has deleterious effects on health. In the short term, when it's protecting your life, it's a good thing. In the long term, when it becomes a bias toward how you operate on a day-to-day basis, it starts to cause sickness and disease and unhealth and unrest and etc. in your body, and that's what we're trying to alleviate. So, okay, so we kind of get that. So then the subluxation is a good thing. It's kind of protecting the body. Okay, well then I guess it's a good thing. But if the subluxation is a good thing, why would you want to correct it? If the subluxation is the body's proper response to stress, number one, why wouldn't it correct it itself? Number two, why would you want to correct it if it's doing the right thing? Oh boy, well now I'm kind of confused. It's a bad thing. No, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Well, if it's a good thing, then why would I want to correct it? Now you start to see how maybe we start working down alleys with our understanding and we kind of hit dead ends and say, I'm kind of stuck here. So this is what I'm hoping to kind of bring together in the way of concepts right now that I believe will be helpful and instrumental for you. So let's talk a little bit further about some of working some of this through. So the analogy that I give, and I gave this on one or two of the open office hours along the way, but I'll repeat it here, is that think of your nervous system like a circuit breaker. And as a matter of fact, as we were setting up for this particular shoot, we have a bunch of lights around us and so on, and we put too many of them on the same circuit. And what happened? The circuit tripped. How does that work? So if you think of the house having an electrical system, it's similar to, let's give it an analogy at least, of a nervous system. It's not a perfect analogy, but it suffices. So it is the electrical system of the house is kind of like the nervous system of the house. It's carrying the power to all the different parts of the house that utilize and need that power to function. Now what happens? If you get a surge of stress into a circuit, a particular circuit, what happens at the breaker box? Well, the circuit trips, or breaker trips. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, there's a couple of contexts here. It's a bad thing, or well, let's start with a good thing. It's a good thing because if the circuit didn't trip, it would cause a fire in the house, meaning there'd be so much stress in the circuit, and the circuit couldn't shut itself down as a protective mechanism. What would happen? It would catch fire, and then the whole house would burn down. So instead, the circuit decides to defend the house. It goes into defense mode, saying, I will shut myself down, compromise the function of the total system in an effort to save the system from totally failing or totally burning down. So in that case, it's a good thing. However, if that circuit goes to, let's say, the refrigerator, what's going to happen? The food in the refrigerator is going to spoil. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Well, it's a bad thing as far as the food in the refrigerator, but it's a good thing as far as the global needs of the house. So as we assess this, we should be recognizing that it's kind of a lesser evil. It's going into defense. You're protecting yourself against adverse circumstances. That's kind of good, but at the same time, it causes some bad things to happen that are maybe not too pleasant. Now, in the medical model, what would they do? They'd say, oh, we got spoiled food in the refrigerator. Let's open up that refrigerator, take the bad food out, and we're going to put good food in. And what's going to happen? The food's going to spoil again. And then they'd say, oh, take that out and put new food. So you can see that that's kind of dealing with the end problem that's not really solving the cause. What the chiropractor would do is they would go back to the circuit breaker box and they would flip the switch and power to the refrigerator goes back on. However, what happens if the power that caused the circuit to trip in the first place, if the surge of stress that caused the circuit to trip in the first place was still present? It just happened to us a little while ago. The circuit will trip again. And that's when we realize it's overloaded. So you turn the power on, it goes off. You turn the power on, it goes off. Literally just went through this in this environment dealing with these lights. So what did we have to do? We had to decrease the stress in the circuit so that it doesn't trip, it doesn't fail, it doesn't subluxate. So we had to split up the stress and go to, run some cables and go to different outlets to spread the stress out so it wasn't concentrated in one area. So it's a pretty good parallel. There's one caveat, though, and this is really important, so listen and pay attention here. It's an important understanding. Why this isn't a perfect analogy is that the electrical system of the house is a static, mechanized system. What's really cool about the nervous system is that the nervous system learns. Donnie Epstein made that point on an on-purpose interview years ago that I did, and I thought it was profound. The nervous system learns, which means that as someone is proactively getting adjusted when they're not in defense mode, the nervous system can have emerging from it and unfolding from it increased strategies for more efficiency of function and basically upgrade itself. And as you're going through the upgrade, now you can actually improve the amount of stress and stress levels that you can manage through the day. And that's what all brings us back to this thing called GAP, General Adaptive Potential, or GAP for short. So what is the GAP and why is the GAP important? We need to understand the nature of stress, and something that we have to understand also, because some people say, well, if the body is so great and so self-healing, why can't it just heal itself from subluxations? Why can't it just heal itself from everything? There is, in chiropractic, traditionally, if you go back to the 1927 Stevenson's textbook, the chiropractic textbook, in the 33 principles, there's a discussion around what is referred to as the limitation of matter. Why is that an important conversation? Why is that an important discussion? Because even though the body is self-healing and self-regulating, what didn't we say? We didn't say the body was perfectly self-healing and perfectly self-regulating, or we didn't say that the body has unlimited ability to self-heal and self-regulate. There's a limitation to what the body can adapt to. And that limitation varies from individual to individual, and quite frankly, it's based upon the GAP, the general adaptive potential. But the examples I give are this. Let's look at stress and the limitations of matter. If I take a human being and put them in front of me, and I take a shotgun and I put it to their head and pull the trigger, if that person is theoretically unsubluxated, and I still blow their head off, they're going to die. I don't care how unsubluxated you are. If you are stressed to a point where your head's blown off, you are not going to survive it. Now, okay, that's extreme. Let's say it's not, you get your head blown off. Let's say that it's the middle of winter, I put you up into the Rocky Mountains at high altitude, I strip you naked, and you're out there overnight, and you're supposed to survive the night exposed to those horrible elements. Is that going to kill you instantly like the shotgun blast? No. Is it going to kill you in 5 minutes? No, probably not. But over the period of the evening, are you going to die at some point? And the answer is yes. You're not going to be able to adapt to the exposure of those elements over a protracted period of time. The stress of that will overwhelm your body. Even if you were unsubluxated when you started, as your body's trying to adapt to that stress, what's going to happen is you're going to start to subluxate, you're going to start going to defense physiology, and you're going to start little by little shutting down the varying systems of the body, trying to protect the core, and at some point in time, you're going to likely die. Okay, so let's say that it's not a shotgun blast ahead. Let's say it's not being put on a mountain naked in cold weather overnight. Let's say it's McDonald's 3 times a week, bad food. Let's say it's an unhealthy relationship you're involved in. Let's say that it's a job that you hate. Is that going to kill you instantly? No. Is that going to kill you overnight? No. But over some period of time, will that stress kill you? The answer is yes. And that is the predicament that most people are in. So let's now translate that into this thing called general adaptive potential. I'll take a marker. So general adaptive potential, or GAP. Basically, let's just draw 2 lines here. You can see I have the 2 lines here. And this is that range of adaptability. Like, in other words, the shotgun blast ahead is way out of the gap. Being able to adapt to freezing weather for 12 hours overnight, that's beyond this gap. But this, let's say, is the area where you can properly manage stress. It's between these 2 lines. You can properly this is the stress in 3 dimensions coming in. So I'll draw a little bit here for you. Disclaimer, I'm not an artist. So you see, like, okay, there's stress coming in and it's here, and then it rides up and it kind of rides down, rides up and rides down. And let's say that this is the combination of the three dimensions of stress: physical, biochemical, psychological. And incidentally, I will contend that there's a fourth dimension of stress that didn't exist over 100 years ago, and that's electromagnetic radiation. We really can't escape it on the planet. We're holding cell phones next to our head. We're sitting in front of computer monitors all day. You walk out into the street without a cell phone, you still have cell towers transmitting stuff. You're walking around your house or your hotel. They have wireless internet floating around. There's electromagnetic radiation pretty much everywhere. We can kind of characterize that as a physical stress, maybe, but I believe it's almost its own category, and it's a fourth dimension. It's ever present, and it's just another thing that our nervous system has to contend with and deal with in an effort to try to adapt to the environment and still express life and health. So we have this stress coming up back and forth, and right now you can see the amount of stress is within the context of these lines, right? In other words, theoretically, if this is your general adaptive potential of the nervous system, and the stress that you're experiencing is within the bounds of that general adaptive potential, your body's going to process that stress, and it's going to dissipate that stress, and because the body is a dissipative system, right? So it's going to take that stress in, it's going to dissipate that stress, and it's not going to cause you theoretically to subluxate and to go into defense physiology. Then what happens? Well, let's say that now some stuff starts to hit the fan, and you start seeing that stress is starting to ride up here more often, and you see it frequently, and then now it's almost all the time, where you have this stress that is now beyond the general adaptive potential. And now it's starting to spike up. Now you might have a brief spike here, and then it gets better, okay? And then you say, okay, the body comes back and compensates. But then when it starts being consistent, the body goes into like this, it's saying I'm in overwhelm now, and it goes into its defense physiology. When it's in defense now, it starts to do this thing called subluxation. So I'll try to draw a different thing for subluxation here. So now what happens? Well, you think the gap, when you're subluxated, your ability to adapt to stress, do you think that increases or decreases? Well, what's going to happen? It's going to decrease. So the gap maybe goes down to here. Now, stress that you used to be able to manage is now, that becomes toxic stress to you because your gap has decreased. As the gap decreases, it's more subluxation. And when you're subluxated and you're in that state, do you think you make healthier choices or less healthy choices? You're going to make less healthy choices. So you make less healthy choices, more subluxation, right? Less gap, then more subluxation, less healthy choices, less gap. And the gap keeps going down in this downward spiral. It's continuing down till you get to a point where you have no gap, meaning that's the point where you can no longer adapt to the environment. And that is basically the very definition of biological death. You have no capacity to adapt to the environment whatsoever. That's when we expire. That's when we die. Most people in your community, most people who are in your office right now, they're in this phase somewhere, usually this downward spiral. So now what happens? Well, they come in and they meet you and they start getting adjusted. And that first adjustment kind of opens up the gap a little bit. And then as it opens it up, maybe you're making some suggestions about some healthier choices, and maybe they feel inspired to make some healthier choices. And that opens the gap a little more, starts the, less subluxation, more healthy choices, opens the gap more, less subluxation, more healthy choices, opens the gap more. And what started down here now becomes an upward spiral all the way back up. And the cool thing about the nervous system learning is that you're not limited saying, you can only get to that ceiling and you stop. You can continue to expand the gap to higher and higher levels. You can widen the gap. So hopefully you start to see the model coming together now, because if somebody says to me, how can you just very briefly summarize what it is you're trying to accomplish as a chiropractor? What's the single goal you have for every patient that comes into your office? My response would be to widen the gap. Now, I'm not saying that's good marketing copy. I'm not saying that's good, compelling patient communication. It could be if you characterize it right. But in the end, to me, the goal, whether it's through my adjustment, lifestyle recommendations, or anything else that I do in the office, the one thing that everything points to is going to be to widen this gap. No matter what they come in with, whether they're like this or whether they're like this, I want to make that gap wider. I want to open up. Now, we're showing it kind of two-dimensionally, but this is obviously a 360 thing. The gap affects everything. So we want to see, you come in here, I'm going to assess you. You're subluxated. It tells me that your gap is compromised. Your ability to adapt to stress in the environment is compromised, which is compromising the function of your body, just like the food that spoils in the refrigerator. We want to assess that. And then what I want to do is we're going to start adjusting to open up that gap. And as we do that, in addition, I'm hoping either you do the lifestyle stuff or you make lifestyle recommendations or you teach classes, whatever. But those things matter also. You put all these things together and you have a proactive approach towards delivering expanded health to individuals that no other type of practitioner in the world delivers. Understanding this, understanding subluxation, understanding the adjustment, putting all this together from a philosophical foundation and translating it into a clinical practice is completely unique, something that no other type of doctor in the world does. This is what makes you great. This is what makes chiropractic great. So now that we're in the post-grad arena with philosophy formula, step one was getting our foundations in place across the board as we have, but now step two is to keep taking it and going further and lighting up more rooms as we walk down the hallway of our understanding. So that's the lesson for this particular month. Let it sink in. Start to figure out how it might apply to what you're doing in your practice. Write down your questions and comments, and let's have some great open office hours coming up where we can discuss this on a deeper level. And the more that this gets sunken into your mind and consciousness, and the clearer it is to you, the more confidence, certainty, and credibility you're going to have, the bigger your practice goes, and the more you enjoy your career as a chiropractor. So thanks for being with me.